Welcome to EA Zoom meetings. Today we welcome Kristin Fontana with her presentation, Nodal Shift, Cancer Capricorn, Evolutionary Transitions in Time. Hi there, Kristin. Welcome.
Hey, Linda. Thank you. I'm very excited about this topic today because it's very major. We're all feeling it already. I know there's a lot going on astrologically, and you and I both know, as well as everybody who studies astrology and pays attention to the energetic shifts in our world and our reality, that they reflect our reality to a T. And when we know what's going on and what's transitioning and what energies are at play, it does help support our efforts and our actions. And I think it's just a very powerful thing to be able to have within our grasp and to understand what's happening so we can step into those changes that we need to for ourselves. So I'm going to move into an introduction here about this topic and just share again that we are all standing at a gate together, collectively, and you are standing at a gate personally. We are on the threshold of some timely change. We think about the nodes right now being at 0 degrees of Aquarius and Leo, and they will be shifting to Cancer and Capricorn on Tuesday, November 3rd. Today they are still at 0 degrees, and Uranus, which rules the sign of Aquarius, is in Taurus, and it is opposing Venus and squaring, they are squaring the nodal axis. This reflects the grave imbalance in our world and perhaps in your relationships or anything that relates to those Venus functions in your life, your survival, what you value. And it is a time of imminent change, liberating change in many cases. So my question to you is, what fence are you currently straddling? Venus is the ruler for Taurus as well as Libra, which does connect to being an energy where the grass may look greener on the other side, or you're not quite sure and you're afraid to get off that fence. So then the question becomes, what fears are surfacing that are preventing you from making a move that you know your soul needs at this juncture? Oftentimes with Uranus involved, if we aren't taking steps and making choices that support our evolution, Uranus will do it for us and shock us into the change. That's never fun. Uranus can be very cold. So we are all together experiencing an evolutionary transition. And this is seen astrologically, as I just mentioned, and it reflects a changing of the guards. You know, where dramatic shifts are really destined to occur. I spoke about the great imbalance. You can see that, of course, with Venus retrograde still opposing Uranus as it squares the nodes. And you can see it occurring in nature itself, as well as our political spheres. The energy on our planet is reaching new polarizing extremes, and just turn on the news and it'll speak to those extremes. But we are experiencing it in nature all over the world as well. Now Saturn, which is a ruler for Capricorn, again, the transiting south node is going to shift into Capricorn. The north node will shift into Cancer on Tuesday. Saturn, the ruler of Capricorn, has been in Capricorn since last December for nearly a year. And Saturn is the archetype of time. It's the archetype of history, his story, versus her story, which would be reflected in Cancer. And there has never been a time when history has not repeated itself. Never. And we are all experiencing that now as well. Now, they're not just nodes of the moon, they're nodes of the planets. And currently transiting Pluto, which is also in the sign of Capricorn, is sitting on its own south node that represents its past. So all of the patriarchal impulses and realities are coming to a head. They are reaching maximum density. And now we have the transiting south node in Capricorn reflecting the past, barreling forward even more. This is progressively about race and about gender. Capricorn connects to your skin, literally to your skin. It's the container for your body, like the wrapping of your body is Capricorn. So this extreme is about race, it's about gender. We are right, you are wrong. She is weak, he is strong. We are white and squeaky clean, and they are dark and dirty. Now, I was watching a documentary about an African tribe in India. Remembering that in India, their skin is brown, of course. The lowest caste in India are the Dalits, and they have the darkest color skin of all. But in a dense forest of South Asia, there's a native African tribe that's been living in quiet obscurity for more than 500 years, and they're known as the Siddis, S-I-D-D-I-S. And they were captured and brought to India as Arab slaves. When they leave their tribe and enter a town or a city, no one wants to touch them or go near them. They refer to their skin as dirty. It's not just happening in the US or in other countries, it's happening all over the world. And I just want to ask, whatever happened to we are all created equal by God? Heinous acts actually occurring in the name of God. Our God is better than your God. I'm sure that many of you are experiencing your own personal realities that are reaching their own limits as well, whether this involves partnerships that need to morph or end, or perhaps you are doing work that your soul feels done with. It's reached its own limit. And you are being called deeper to do more meaningful work, work that reflects the design of your own personal thumbprint. Remembering that no two are alike. No two souls are alike. In my last talk on Venus retrograde, squaring the nodes, I discussed the peaking intensity that accompanies this review process as Venus opposes Uranus, which, by the way, it's retrograde right now. They both are. Venus will shift direct November 16th. As it does, it will move forward and oppose Uranus one more time, the end of November. For the next 5 weeks, we've got this energy at hand where there's a lot of unpredictability in our world and in our lives. Now, in the last month or more, I think it was September now, karmic experiences are suddenly surfacing all over the place. And we definitely saw that in the US with the Kavanaugh hearing. And whatever feels unfinished will come rushing back in many cases so you can evolve. The recent retrograde transit, and it's still occurring, we're still undergoing this transit, but it has triggered the call of the woman. In the US, they are calling this the Year of the Woman because more women are running for office here and joining politics than have ever in the history of politics. Women that have never even been involved. In historic numbers, they're showing up. But this Venus retrograde transit triggered the call of the woman as Christine Blasey Ford so courageously dealt with her own debilitating demons and took on an army of men to defend her story. While the outcome was not what she hoped for, her choice to put herself in the vulnerable spotlight will empower more women all over the world to find the courage to find their own voice and defend themselves. I have a client who entered college in August as a freshman. Her daughter was raped her first week of college. A month later, the Kavanaugh hearings occurred. And while she would have preferred to keep this silent, somebody else who knew about it came forward because of what was going on in the media. It gave somebody else the push to do the right thing, even in the face of fear. It's interesting, in October, the Nobel Peace Prize for 2018 was awarded to Denis Mukwege and Nadia Murad for their efforts to end the use of sexual violence as a weapon of war and armed conflict. Denis Mukwege has devoted his life to defending victims of wartime sexual violence in the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is one of the most dangerous places in the world to be a woman. Nadia Murad, a Yazidi human rights activist and survivor of sexual slavery by Islamic State in Iraq, was the other recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize, a Black man and an Iraqi woman. Those who do not know Nadia's story, and one she writes about in her book, The Last Girl, one I highly recommend. She's 25 and is one of an estimated 3,000 Yazidi girls and women who were victims of rape and other abuses by the ISIS army. The abuses were systematic and part of a military strategy. Look at the Capricorn Cancer axis. Now, we hadn't even reached the transiting nodes when this occurred, but we are all experiencing this polarizing extreme of dominance and submission, man versus woman, as we look at the transiting Pluto conjunct its own south node of Pluto, south node of Saturn, and south node of Jupiter, all in Capricorn. Nadia was only 22 when the terrorists invaded her village in northern Iraq in 2014, and she was taken into captivity along with 6,500 other women. Her mother and 6 brothers were killed as the ISIS fighters advanced. Nadia was enslaved, repeatedly raped, and told what to wear and made to change her religion. She eventually escaped and fled to Germany and has since become a United Nations Goodwill Ambassador. Again, her book is The Last Girl, and I highly recommend it. Everything does come back around, and if you feel there are still injustices in your life or in those of others, do know that God does take care of all things. At some point in time, there will be a reaction to wrong action, as well as reward when taking actions that support your highest and your best, whatever they may be. I'd like to discuss now the significance of what it means for the transiting nodes to change signs. Please switch slides, Linda. For those of you who are new to astrology, the lunar nodes in a chart or a birth chart, they look like horseshoes. They are windows into your past and into your future. The south node represents your past, and the north node of the moon represents your future. If you have a hard time remembering this, one thing that used to help me at the beginning was to imagine that you're climbing a mountain. So the north node of the moon, which would be the top of that mountain, is your future, where you're headed. The south node of the moon, essentially the natal moon, is really where you stand today, but the south node of the moon being the past. And as I mentioned before, there are south and north nodes of all the planets. All right, next slide, please. So the south node of the moon essentially is the ego that your soul chose in a past life, moving into this life in order to actualize your soul's intentions, which is seen in the natal position of Pluto. How you were emotionally wired, put together at that time. That's okay, you can move on. Yeah. All right, the north node of the moon then represents the ego your soul is creating in order to support the evolution of your soul moving forward. Now, today we are discussing the transiting nodes, but of course I wanted to share what those natal nodes meant, what they're about. The transiting nodes are extremely significant and we will be showing some examples of how they reflect significant changes in your life. But the natural motion of the lunar nodes and the transiting nodes is retrograde. The reason is that we are always returning or referring to our past, reflecting upon it in order to create a better future for ourselves. If we remember something that happened in the past that didn't go well, and we're standing at that same decision point, we will make a new choice for ourselves. Hopefully we will make new choices in the face of old dynamics, because of remembering what happened before. That's why the natural motion is retrograde. It takes 18 years for those nodes to go all the way around the zodiac. They will spend 18 months in any given sign. Current transiting south node again is at 0 degrees Aquarius and will back in to Capricorn, and the current transiting node symbolizing the future will, it's at 0 degrees Leo today, will back in at 29 degrees of Cancer. The last time Uranus has been in this position, by the way, it's opposing your Venus and squaring the nodes, was 84 years ago. Now, 84 years ago, let's think about this, and we can leave this chart up, Linda, this is fine. 84 years ago was a time of the Depression. This is when Hitler became the ruler of Germany. In March of 1935, Uranus was at 29 degrees Aries. That's what Uranus will be backing into again on Tuesday, November 3rd, 2018. This is the same time Roosevelt came into power, 1932, approximately that time during the Depression, and he was offering the New Deal here in the US. So these are significant markers. Over 5 million Americans actually signed up to be a part of that party, that deal. Socialism instead of capitalism. It does take an extreme to counteract an extreme. Now, the scary thing was Hitler was in power from 1933 all the way to 1945. Let's hope that history does not repeat itself this time. Trauma occurs, extreme trauma occurs when people do not acknowledge reality. Well, they want to pretend something else is happening than what really is. I want you to think about the changing of the nodes in your own personal life. Think about it, whatever sign you are. For example, if you are a Scorpio and you look to the signs to your left and to your right, you've got Libra on the left and Sag on the right. You couldn't be more different than those archetypes. Pick another sign. You're an Aries. You look to your left, there's Pisces. To your right, there's Taurus. You could not be more different than those signs. If you really emotionally tune into those energies, and then you imagine that these nodes, which are lunar, they're lunar aspects, they're emotional energies, shifting signs. It's an extreme shift. It's palpable. You will feel it, dramatically so. The south node in Aquarius and the north node in Leo, which is where the nodes are today, they are yang. We just had 18 months of yang, going from outside to now yin, inside. Capricorn and Cancer are yin. It will force you in. Now, when we're looking at the transiting nodes, as we are discussing today, we also have to look to the ruler of the nodes. The transiting nodes are telling you what is happening. The ruler for those nodes are telling you how it happens. Now, with the north node pulling us into our future being in Cancer, think about it. The moon is the ruler for Cancer, and it changes signs every 2 days. Well, how do you track that? It's moving so quickly. The transiting south node in Capricorn ruled by Saturn. It's a little easier to get an idea of what's going on. But the way to understand that is that things are going to be happening very quickly. In your life, they will be happening very quickly. Emotionally, the tides will be changing and impacting your life and having you make choices, that change often. Any of you who carry a lot of Cancer energy in your chart, strong fourth house, personal planets in Cancer, you know that the way that you feel in your body changes quickly. That's why Cancer is known as a moody archetype, because it's ruled by the moon and so sensitive to the tides of the moon. All right. With the south node in Capricorn, the screws are definitely tightening. not just in the US, but everywhere. I mean, there's not a country now, I feel, that isn't going through some major change politically. The new president of Brazil says he wants to wipe out over 900,000 indigenous people in Brazil. He praised the US Army for the genocide of the American Indians, and he wants to tear apart the forests there for money, for power. Wipe them out. It's all over the planet. I'm sure this is not what God intended in the creation of this planet. Things are reaching critical extremes. Now, what does this mean, though, for you personally? And I want to dial it back so you can feel like you have some control over your reality. Because a lot of us are going to be feeling like we have no control over what we're witnessing and kind of holding on for dear life. You know, I have a lot of clients that tell me they don't even want to turn on the news. They can't even look at it anymore. They're paralyzed by what's happening. But what these shifts are offering you is an opportunity to decondition, to remove your own fears, the layers you've collected over time that don't naturally define you. This shift will draw you all the way into your center, your emotional body, so you can evolve. And it will demand, ultimately, that you depend on yourself to nurture yourself, to strengthen yourself. That will require absolute emotional self-reliance first. And you will find that or that feeling of the support within yourself, because through extension, you will be connected to something much larger. You're going to have to get soft to gain any ground. There's just no way that you're going to be able to evolve unless you soften what you're trying to control or protect. I'm going to refer to this image. I'm going to just refer to this image in a moment, but I want to share a story just to lighten things a little bit. I noticed that this webinar was starting with the ascendant in Capricorn. We've got so much Capricorn energy. And I do want to lighten things for a moment. You can go back to the next slide, number 9, Linda. You know, when you're a parent, all of you who are parents, I'm sure you know that our children are our teachers. It can be very humbling as a parent. And I remember a time when my son was 2 or 3, and I just come back from Sedona. There was an EA conference there. I traveled, I drove, and got home very late at night, I don't know, 1 or 2 in the morning. And I had a client the next morning, and I was extremely exhausted. And I had to get him to preschool down the street because I had a client coming to the house. And he didn't want anything to do with putting his little shoes on, nothing to do with it. And the more I tried to control him from afar, please come here, I need to put your shoes on so you can go to preschool, the more I tried to control him, the more he rebelled. And I remember getting angry, the natural square to Aries. Here I am, mother, Cancer, trying to control him, the polarity Capricorn, and he's saying, no way, Jose. So I was getting angry and my voice was getting louder. I mean, he's 2 or 3 years old. Nothing I was doing was working. All of a sudden, I wanted to say too that the anger, as Yogananda said, blots out God, or what I experienced was created kinks of separation. He was not obeying my orders, Capricorn. I collapsed to the floor and I started to cry. Like literally, I was so exhausted, I started to sob. And he came running so fast. He sat his little booty down and stuck his foot out and he said, Mommy, please don't cry. Please don't cry. Okay, please don't cry. Here's my foot. And I couldn't believe what I had experienced in that moment. He didn't need me or want me to be strong and tough. He needed me to be soft. Now, does this mean that anytime that you want your kids to behave or to do what you need them to do in any moment is to start crying and they'll come running? No. But it taught me, if you really want to reach somebody, it's got to happen through the emotional door. And there's really no emotion when you're being Capricorn with somebody. They need to feel your Cancer. They need to feel your heart. They need to feel your emotion, your tenderness. Things will happen with far greater ease when we remember that. And I'll tell you what, he taught me a lesson that day that changed the way I parented for the rest of his life up till now. And at 16 years old, I thought to myself the other day, you're doing okay as a mother when your 16-year-old son's favorite song is God is a Woman. It's his favorite song right now. So anyway, I just wanted to share that because our memories, the ones that we have an emotional connection to, we never forget. They change us. They forever change us. All right, we can go to the next slide. Last time I spoke about Venus, I was talking a bit about, or it might have been the Mars retrograde Zoom meeting I did, but I was referring to the chakras. And we're just going to look at the root chakra right now. All the chakras are ruled by a planet or two. The root chakra, which is at the base of our spine, there are 7 chakras. The base of the spine is where the soul lives, hence the name root. The root chakra has 3 layers. At the central layer, the core, we have Pluto. It's ruled by Pluto, which is the soul. And the soul, all of our souls, carries a vibration, an energy. I talked a lot about clearing the static off our signal with this Venus retrograde transit. And the Mars retrograde transit this summer in Aquarius. The retrograde allows us to really remove what no longer serves us, because we're really reflecting upon the past and not wanting to repeat the things that have caused us pain, or the things that haven't been fair. So our soul has an energy about it, a transmission. And our soul sends out a signal to the world that says, this is who I am. This is what I believe. This is what's my truth. And will affect how you attract and who you attract and what you attract. The middle layer is ruled by Uranus. That's our vibration, our energy field. And the outer layer is Saturn. This is how we protect ourselves, defend against anything. Saturn, that outer layer, reflects our resistance and our fears. Like putting a mute in a trumpet or an instrument to dumb it down, to mute it, the sound of it. Now the outer layer for any soul, the density of the outer layer of the root chakra is going to be different between souls. And it all depends on how much any soul is repressing in their life, how much you are repressing. If you're repressing a lot of your naturalness, that outer layer is going to be really thick. If you are walking in the world openly, honestly, impeccably, organically, that outer layer is going to be thin. We need Saturn to protect us. It's just how much of that outer layer that is wrapped around your root chakra, how much of it do you really need? How much of that layer is hurting you? Jeffrey Wolf Green used to say, do you have any idea how much energy it takes to repress what is natural? it is truly backbreaking. So the current Uranus transit, Uranus rules the middle layer of that root chakra, right? So if you're in your chart natally, or your personal chart, your natal chart, if you are receiving any major transits to personal planets by Pluto, Uranus, or Saturn, they are chipping away at that root. They are working to change your vibration or to eliminate resistance. And I'll tell you how it works. Currently, transiting Pluto is conjunct its own south node. It's creating a lot of inner pressure on all of us to be authentic, to kick off the old conditioning. It's working in the middle layer to change our vibration, our energy field. Uranus currently is opposing Venus and squaring the nodal axis. It's literally about changing your coding in a sense. And it is definitely about working to try and clear the static so that you can reach people or people can reach you. What happens is that Pluto starts to push on that outer ring with the help of Uranus. It's like an earthquake, jackhammer to cement. Plutonian component symbolically will ooze out those cracks. See those cracks? Like hot lava, and melt away the outer ring and thin it down. Sometimes it takes total trauma, crises, cataclysm in order for that to happen. But it will happen. So the question becomes, do you want to help it happen and make it less painful, or just wait till the bomb hits, so to speak? You can participate in your evolution, but it requires you to be able to look at the stuff that scares you the most. Stare it straight in the face. Take responsibility for your role in creating it, for setting something in motion. Ask yourself, why did my soul need to create this? Or, I'm really tired of the way things have been, and I don't care what it takes, how vulnerable I have to make myself. I can't live like this any longer. This reminds me of a client I had recently too, who carries a lot of Cancer energy. And those of you that have been studying this work for a long time do know that if you carry a lot of Cancer energy, Pluto in the 4th or planets in Cancer, you're a soul that's chosen a life where you're being forced back on yourself emotionally so you can evolve. It can feel like a very lonely ride. But even the spiritual greats will lose people that they love and make themselves more vulnerable in order for them to access something more eternal. It doesn't stop as you evolve. But it is a hard energy to live with, and it demands that you pull yourself up by your inner bootstraps. She shared with me that her mother never told her she loved her until she was 72. It took 72 years to hear those words. She said her husband treated her like a dog, that she married her mother. It took her 72 years to hear I love you from her mother, for her mom to put down the sword, because her mom was facing her own demise or exit, knocking on death's door. When you're in your 90s, you know, at some point, we all become vulnerable. It took her mom getting soft before she could ever speak those words to her own daughter. But this woman got to a point where she didn't need those words to be okay. And that's ultimately why she finally heard them. So with Venus retrograde, it is about not attaching to another person to make you whole, to not attach to circumstances to make you okay, to not need to hear a certain thing to feel complete. And while we're all going to be experiencing this shift, we will all be thrown back on ourselves in one way or another. Those of you with those natal Cancer signatures know exactly what I'm talking about. And what you're going to be learning, if you haven't already, is that ultimate strength lies in the vulnerability. You can change the slide, Linda. This is a Capricorn lesson. Most people that have a lot of Capricorn energy in their chart appear to the world like they have everything under control. But the secret about Capricorn is inside, it's so tender they couldn't be more emotional. You get through to a Capricorn, they're the sweetest thing in the world. But it takes so much to bring down that armor. But this lesson around ultimate strength lies in the vulnerability. It doesn't mean weakness. What is more beautiful than when you see somebody walking down the street as they are, holding up nothing, pretending not to be anybody other than who they are? It is so attractive. It doesn't matter what they look like. Blue hair, 10 piercings, tattoos. It's the light coming out of their eyes. It said, this is how God made me. This is who I am. Take it or leave it. I don't need you to feel good about myself. That is attractive. I remember a story, or an incident, I should say, several years ago now, and it was definitely the dark night of the soul for me. I was dealing with my own demons and reaching some really critical points in my own evolution. Of course, my soul was drawing them in necessarily, so we don't get into this work and live it scot-free. We have to do our own work so we can help other people. We have to know what it feels like in order to teach it, to talk it, to help someone through something we've already been through. And I cried rivers that night. It was just hell on earth for me. I cried till the storm ran out of rain, as I said. There was nothing left. I felt hollow and weak. And we were having company that next day, and I'd cried through the night, through the day even. And a friend of mine knocked on the door, and I had showered, but I don't think I even brushed my hair, and had threw jeans on and a t-shirt, and I couldn't change this event of having people over. It was something that had to happen. I opened the door, and my friend said to me, "Oh my gosh, Kristin, I have never seen you look so beautiful." I mean, I was completely shocked because I felt like I could barely stand on my own 2 feet. I felt so weak. And I realized, well, first I actually went into the bathroom and looked in the mirror because I had no idea what she was looking at. And the whites of my eyes were white. They were not red and bloodshot like I felt they would be. But I had nothing to hold up anymore. I had nothing to defend. I had nothing to protect. What she saw was just my soul, the purity of my soul in that moment that said, I surrender. I can't change certain pieces of my past. I wish I could. But I can change this moment and how I move forward. And it was amazing. Even my face was so relaxed. I'd never seen my skin look like that. Clarissa Pinkola Estes says in Women Who Run with the Wolves, tears lift your boat off the rocks and take you down river to a better place. And she also says, like changes in the weather, and we're experiencing that here this fall as we approach winter, and changes of the weather, an old injury can ache again. But it's important to remember that in tensile strength, a scar is tougher than skin. So those of you that natally have a South Node in Capricorn, and those of us that are going to be experiencing the past circling back in some way, we're having to face some fears. We all have scars. It just made us who we are. We just have to lean on the knowing that it's going to require us to get very soft in order to gain any ground. And that does not mean weak. That is where your ultimate strength lies. The power of your influence, whether it's for a 2-year-old or a 20-year-old, and your ability to reach somebody that you love or somebody that needs to hear what you have to say. Next slide, please. Capricorn connects to guilt. There are 2 different types of guilt. There's natural guilt and there's conditioned guilt. Conditioned guilt is the guilt that we collect through cultural influences, patriarchal norms, should-bes. Natural guilt is something that we do that we know is wrong. If you lie to someone or betray somebody, that's natural guilt. Now, the stuff that you've collected that is conditioned, that kind of guilt, like what the church might say is wrong, a little girl who touches herself and is punished for it, conditioned guilt. Natural guilt is meant to stay in the soul forever. Forever. And the intent is so we don't do whatever it is again. We'll remember. We'll remember the last time we didn't tell the truth. And we'll remember the consequences that occurred because of that. So South Node in Capricorn through transit, it may trigger a boatload of guilt. You know, it might be a woman who left a marriage and left her husband with the kids because she just couldn't deal with it, or vice versa. Feeling guilty because of not feeling like they were strong enough to stay. There are a million different examples of this. But that natural guilt is meant to stay, and it's not so much about the need for you to punish yourself for it. It's not what it's about at all. It's just about learning from it. So this period of time can be really important for purging and just jettisoning the stuff that your soul isn't meant to carry. God does not want you to punish yourself for things, especially when they're rooted in our own conditioning. They have nothing to do with natural law. You know, ultimately, we just need to forgive ourselves for whatever it is. And of course, remember the past, not deny the past, take responsibility for the past, but create a better future for ourselves on the heels of that past. Okay, next slide. I love this slide. This is so beautiful. Thank you, Linda, for all these amazing slides. I want to just dive in this pool of water. A lot of times when I think of Capricorn, I think of, you know, the things that we hold on to feel secure. And I think about when I was growing up, and I have older brothers, and it didn't happen once, but I was definitely thrown into the pool with my clothes on more times than I wanted to be, or that I could count. And I just remember how hard it was to get out of there, to even swim an inch. So if we want to evolve, we got to strip it down. We got to get vulnerable. It's like the difference between swimming with your clothes on and skinny dipping. Skinny dipping is the most liberating experience there could be. It's highly vulnerable feeling, especially if you're not alone and what have you. But that's the experience that most of us know. I mean, we've all taken baths or showers, but to be in a pool of water, and to me, it reminds me of, when I think of the sea, or I think of 12th house and Pisces, representing the source of all things. It's a feeling of being held by that energy, free of anything that's trying to limit us. It's an incredible feeling. So let's imagine too that you want to travel the world by foot, and you take off from California and you just start walking east. At some point you're going to run out of land. Your feet can only take you so far. The mind has a limit too. There are no shortcuts. Eventually you're going to have to get into the water. The water represents that timeless, seamless, boundless energy that is limited by nothing. And the only way the soul can evolve is through this water trinity: Cancer, Scorpio, Pisces. Everything happens through the emotional door. Even real intimacy, sustainable connection with another soul, must occur through the emotional door. First, Cancer, Scorpio. Now, if you think about this, if you look at this image a little longer, and Linda and I were talking about it, if we drew a connection from that south node up there at Capricorn to Pisces and Scorpio, creates a kite pattern. The transiting north node is pulling us into our future. It's pulling us into the water. It's pulling us into our emotion. It's trying to help establish more equality and balance on the planet. Year of the Woman in the US is an example. Nadia Murad winning the Nobel Prize just last month is an example. But the patriarchy's been in place for so freaking long. It's going to take some time. It's going to take some serious higher ups to help with that, through the sextile to Pisces over there and Scorpio on the other side. Even a rock will wear down over time by water. And it's going to take some time for us to get back or to establish a better state of balance. But the fastest way for that to happen is for all of us to start with ourselves, our inner reality, our own growth, our own maturation. So the tail of the kite here, we've got the North Node in Cancer, but if you were to look at this as a kite, the tail would be Cancer. This is about going back to our matriarchal roots. We have to go back to those origins where actually women were the shamans and the teachers. We have to go back in order to move forward again. It's a cardinal archetype. We're not going to go back to pulling roots out of the ground, but we have to go back emotionally. We have to remember where it started. All right, we can go to the next slide. All right, let's move to the last slide again. Let's move back to that water trinity slide for a moment. Looking at the water trinity, as I shared prior, is a reflection of evolution itself, Cancer, Scorpio, Pisces. The only way the soul can evolve is through that watery element. It's like getting into the river, as I've shared before in other talks. The river will always follow the path of least resistance. As you get into the river, Remember, without those clothes on. Get in naked. What do they say? Is it Amma? Or someone says, go to God, you got to go naked or don't go at all. And you get into the river and you allow it to carry you with the river following the path of least resistance as it finds its way back to the sea representing God or the source of all things. What's equally as important here is that, like a wave separating from the sea, it's like a soul being born. Within the wave are desires that you have that separate you from the source that created you. Yet you are always part of that sea. God expressing itself, an extension of something larger, expressing itself and evolving. After you have actualized what you're after and that wave dissolves and it merges back to the sea, then a new desire is born again. What will be so important in the next period of time, and really something to practice forever, is to consciously stay centered in the sea versus the wave. Stay rooted in the sea, rooted in your center. When you are centered in the wave, instead of when you are centered in the sea versus the wave, then you are not subjected to all those cross currents that occur when you're in the middle of a wave. So you can be going after something in the world that's important to you. You are experiencing an energy of separateness from that which created you. But within yourself, you can stay centered in that energy that allows you to feel whole at all times. So when life gets really topsy-turvy and unpredictable, as it will, I'm sure, and has been, it's a good visual to keep within yourself, to calm yourself, to center yourself. All right, next slide, Linda, please. All right, I want to show you the power of these transiting nodes. We're going to use a piece of history here, considering so much of what happened at this point in time feels to be happening in this day and age. Still, inequality and injustice of white supremacy and repressive legislation is what Nelson Mandela was dealing with. 27 years in prison. So let's look at his chart. Of course, he has a 7th house Pluto in Cancer, natally, balsamic, Jupiter's balsamic to that Pluto. And the ruler is the moon in Scorpio in the 12th house. Sacrificed his own life for the sake of the people, 7th house, the people. And he was in prison for 27 years. All in that one signature, you can see that. So even his south node is in the 7th, with Venus conjunct the south node. It was all about the people and justice. Interesting in that, one of his quotes was, "Forgiveness liberates the soul. It removes fear." Forgiveness does. Remember when we were talking about guilt linked with Capricorn? To forgive yourself removes fear. That's why it's so powerful. He said, "I have a very large family, 42 million." Moon in Scorpio in the 12th house. All right, well, in this chart, on the day that he was released, the transiting south node in Leo was exactly conjunct his natal Mercury and his Saturn. Of course, the Saturn was that energy of keeping him behind bars. Mercury's like the key. It's a ruler for his south node, his natal south node in Gemini. Mercury rules that. Jupiter returned almost to the minute on that day. Jupiter's about truth. The truth shall set you free. It's a ruler for his whole chart with that Sagittarius rising, natal north node in Sagittarius. It's incredible, the transits that day. Transiting Ceres is exactly conjunct his south node. He was recovering something lost from the past, his freedom. That's what he was recovering. And I don't know if all of you or many of you know this, but he was offered a release 5 years prior. But that release had conditions. The transiting south node was on his moon at that time, but it was traveling with Saturn, transiting Saturn, conditions. He stayed in jail for 5 more years because what they wanted from him was to release or renounce violence or any violent protest as a means to bring about change in South Africa. Now, the problem with that was it wasn't getting them anywhere. And so he couldn't promise that that wouldn't occur. And so he stayed in prison for 5 more years. And now Saturn obviously moved on, and we've got the transiting south node right on his Mercury conjunct Saturn. Pluto obviously was very close to his moon as well at this time. And Pluto is not always going to be an end to something. It can rebirth your life as well. He went from prison to president with that transit that followed. And you think about all that beautiful Sagittarian energy in his chart. Jupiter balsamic to Pluto, Sag rising, North Node and Sag. Sag is an international, multicultural energy. He created the Rainbow Nation, the extraordinary diversity of races and tribes, creeds and languages and landscapes that characterize South Africa. There's 11 languages. And he said we have to surprise them with compassion, strength, and generosity. That is Sagittarius generosity. I would consider that Leo as well. He said, I've walked a long walk to freedom. 27 years. I'd say that's a long walk, almost a Saturn return there. It has been a lonely road. Oh yeah, but it's not over yet. No one is born to hate another based on the color of their skin. People learn to hate. They can be taught to love, for love comes more naturally to the human. There's several things here, but I wanted to focus on the nodes. They are gates. They are turning points. They are keys. They are so significant in the astrological chart in terms of your evolution as markers in time. Okay, you can go to the next slide. Mahatma Gandhi. The day of his assassination, the transiting south node was conjunct his Mars in the first house in Scorpio, shot dead. The ruler of his south, or the transiting south node in Scorpio, is Pluto. His natal Pluto is conjunct the transiting north node. Transiting Pluto obviously is pretty close to his moon, but that transiting Saturn is exactly conjunct his moon. Time's up. The time's up booth here. Done. On his way to a prayer meeting. Now, Gandhi was assassinated in the compound of a large mansion. Look at the ruler. The ruler of the south node in Scorpio is Pluto conjunct Saturn and Leo, right on his moon. In Leo, mansion. It's literal in these signatures. He was assassinated by a right-wing advocate of Hindu nationalism. God, if this isn't history repeating itself, I don't know what is. Like, how many countries on this planet right now are representing this extreme swing in the people? Nationalism is a hot topic right now, unfortunately. All right. Let's see here if there's anything else significant. I mean, we can talk about this chart all day, but I just want to show you these transiting nodes, the significant transitions in time. For Gandhi, this represents the end of his life. Next slide. John F. Kennedy. Wow, this one is probably the most intense. Transiting north node exactly conjunct his natal south node in Cancer. Those nodes through transit are exactly what we are entering now at this time. The nodes won't reach 11 degrees for several months. Remember, they go backward. They start at 29 and they'll work their way back. And this is just overlap to his specific chart. But there's somebody in politics right now that reminds me of JFK. And he is running in Texas, O'Rourke. And so I'll keep my eye on him because hopefully it won't be this kind of repeat, but I bet he'll be running. He says he's not running for president, but he sure sounds like a JFK. So here's an exact transit here. Now, you can see too that the transiting South node conjunct his North node in Capricorn, he was in a car traveling when he got shot. The ruler is Saturn conjunct the moon in the 4th and is in conjunct his natal moon. He was sitting right next to his wife and the trauma that it caused her as well. Well, the whole country, world at that time. Again, very significant and very important to watch these nodes. I've noticed that some people were mentioning that they had their own South and North node in these signs. And I don't want to alarm you because this doesn't mean the same thing for everybody. They're just significant markers in time. Your own past is coming back for you to look at, address, deal with, confront. New chapters are beginning in your life. And with Uranus in the position that it is in now, it is an opportunity to transform your life, to liberate yourself, to increase your awareness, for your consciousness to expand. We've got Jupiter about to move into Sagittarius, hallelujah, on the 8th of November. Okay, next slide. Joan of Arc. 500 years after she was burned at the stake, and at that time, the transiting nodes in the sky were squaring her Saturn, exactly to the degree when she was burned at the stake. 500 years later, she was canonized and declared a Roman Catholic saint by the church. And this is a chart for when that occurred. Look at where the nodes are. They just shifted retrograde into the 4th and 10th house, Cancer, Capricorn houses. The transiting South node is really 3 degrees off the conjunction to her natal Saturn, which was the thing in the way the time that she got burned at the stake. Transiting Saturn, the ruler, for Capricorn, right on her South node. The past came back. And no archetype is all bad or all good. Capricorn can be incredibly powerful in terms of sustaining something you want. It can represent the harvest after a long journey of discipline and determination. And this transiting South node in Capricorn, which is ruled by Saturn, is energizing and a determination in you to identify what it is that your soul needs in order to create better structures or commitments or timelines, and that will support you forward to identify what you need, not to mark time anymore. Determination, Capricorn, Saturn. But in Joan of Arc's case here, this is really, I mean, that Saturn rules her Sun, her Venus, her Mercury. And she was finally recognized for the woman and the warrior that she was. Now, Joan of Arc was a woman, but she had to dress like a man. She led an army of men. When we look at Cancer and Capricorn, it connects to gender. Capricorn is male, Cancer's female. So here's a woman operating like a man. And you can see that in this chart. Some of the other signatures I just wanted to point out. Transiting Pluto is trining her North node in Pisces at that time. Uranus is conjunct the North node. A lot of incredibly powerful transits. I'm sure she was somewhere, whether on Earth or in the astral plane where she became aware of this honor. It's too bad it took 500 years, but anyway, a woman was honored. And that was a big deal at that time in our history by men. Okay, so let's move to the next slide. So this is a chart for November 6th, 2018. It's this Tuesday. And I realize there are people listening to this or here today that are not from the US. Somebody made a comment on the last webinar I did and mentioned something about the US being spoiled. And I don't feel like we're very spoiled right now, I'll tell you that. Oh dear, but anyway, not feeling very spoiled in the US. So we are having a very big election, and a lot is riding on this one. A lot of women are running. In fact, there's a woman who is tied in Georgia, Black woman. And if she wins, it would be the first Black female governor in US history. And so we can see this represented on the day of this election is when the nodes change signs. They shift from Aquarius and Leo to Capricorn and Cancer, literally in the middle of the day, like at, I don't know, let's see what it says, 3:07 p.m. Pacific. And Uranus on this day retrogrades from Taurus back into Aries. Aries is about new beginnings, right? It's the first sign of the zodiac. It's also about war and revolt. And this represents a day of extremes, indeed. Jupiter's at 29 degrees of Scorpio, and will shift into Sagittarius a couple days later. But that Jupiter's making an exacting conjunct to Uranus. So this is a critical juncture in time for this country here. And I don't want to get into my own political, it's clear what they are from this talk, but you know, in order for any semblance of balance to occur, being that 1% of the population owns about 65% of the wealth of the world, in order to establish any relative balance, some extreme has to happen on that day, away from where it is. That's what I will say. So we'll see how that goes. Transiting Pluto, remember, is conjunct its own south node. Can you see that, everybody? On the outer ring, it's conjunct the south node of Saturn and the south node of Pluto. Now, Pluto can bring everything down, really down to the ground, to start over. And it, you know, it is a death and a rebirth of something. It is representing an elimination, progressive elimination of old, outmoded, limiting, oppressive, repressive, suppressive ways. It's just a matter of time before Saturn moves into Aquarius and Pluto moves into Aquarius as well. It's just a matter of time before the minorities will rebel, the world will rebel, and at some point we will establish a state of balance, relative balance again. It may start on Tuesday. It just might start then. Or get a little bit closer. So what does this mean though for you? We talked about what the shift was going to mean. What is required of you? Laying down resentments, resistance, stepping out of old clothes, moving away from fear. It might take forgiving yourself or forgiving another to get there. Allowing yourself to be more vulnerable, knowing that ultimate strength does lie right there in the center of that feeling. There's no other way through. There's no other way back to the sea. There's no other way back to feeling or experience of wholeness or holiness. It's the only way to get there. It's just a matter of time. All right, can we move to the next slide? So I've just been discussing a little bit about the matriarchy and the patriarchy. The matriarchy connects to the sign of Cancer, going back in order to the matriarchy. With the North Node in Cancer, we have to pull from that time in order to move forward again, naturally. The matriarchy was in a transition. It's from 6500 BCE to 5500 BCE. It might have been at least 1,000 to 2,000 years at that time. Obviously, it didn't happen overnight. And it occurred when men realized that they had an equal role in making a baby. When women were getting pregnant, it was like a divine gift that was thought. And so men started taking control progressively over time. And with the north nodes of Pluto, Saturn, and Jupiter, the future of those planets being in Cancer, it is just a matter of time before we establish a greater semblance of balance. So yes, transiting Pluto is conjunct its own south node in Capricorn. It's conjunct its own south node in Saturn. And as I mentioned, the north node, the north nodes of Pluto, Saturn, and Jupiter are all in Cancer, all of them. So this transiting north node will be going over those points in the next 18 months. The south node of Venus is conjunct Jupiter in Scorpio, as well as one I didn't mention. And combining all of these energies, it reflects our reality right now. We are at a transition point. It will take time. But every one of us is responsible for how much time it takes, whether it's what we're doing within ourselves and our own growth and the choices that we're making and the courage we are accessing in order to step out of fear and into our strengths. And ultimately, what we do with who we are in the world will also make a difference. One day at a time, one person at a time. Next slide, Linda. Yes, and as I mentioned earlier, this is a 2 steps forward, 1 step back process. That's how it works with cardinal archetypes. And I shared some of this information recently, so it's just a slide for you to reflect upon some of these words again. This current Venus retrograde transit is not over yet. It will station direct on November 16th and will re-enter Scorpio early December. Next slide. Jeff Green shares here in this quote that the only way to deepen your astrology is to deepen yourself. You cannot be taught depth. It must come from within. And the only way that can happen is to access that water trine, Cancer, Scorpio, Pisces. I see there's a question here.
Well, we've reached the end of your slides. So would you like to take some questions?
Sure. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to field them or answer anything I can.
Okay, well, I wrote one down. Jeff Green taught that we don't leave the South Node behind, that the South Node continues to evolve. I would imagine the South Node in Capricorn is new structures being built. Could you please explain how Capricorn continues to evolve?
That's a great question, because all of the archetypes have a light and a shadow, right? So when you think about somebody like Yogananda, he has, his chart is escaping me right now, but I think he has a very strong signature in the 10th house. It's a Capricorn house. But, you know, he is in a very evolved soul. So he was bringing natural teachings to the collective, to the mainstream. So, for example, if somebody is very ambitious in their work and they are a corporate person and really know how to shoulder a lot of responsibility, and their whole focus is on finance, that South Node in Capricorn for that soul evolves by taking who they are and how capable they are and bringing it to an environment or reality that is less about the material and more about the spiritual. That would be an example. And I would say too that, as I mentioned earlier, you know, not everybody, there are plenty of people in a spiritual state of evolution that aren't necessarily working with the masses in spiritual ways. It's the journey within themselves. Pluto in the 10th house, yes, Yogananda had. I didn't want to misquote that. Pluto conjunct Neptune in the 10th house in Gemini, 10th house Pluto, Capricorn energy. And so it is about being an authority of something. And all of our charts are evolving. We're all evolving. We're not static beings. So what we're doing in our life is evolving. Who we are in the world is evolving. So I would say how that Capricorn South Node evolves is to remove the negative emotion that is linked with the Capricorn, any kind of guilt or remorse, regret, especially regret. We can't get that time back, but we can use that time today and we can use it moving forward. We can remember what was and create new structures, yes, Linda, that support a higher expression of ourselves. Capricorn's an incredible archetype. We need it in our life, in our world, to support us, to sustain us, to stay determined. That's Capricorn. And maybe it's staying determined to fight the good fight, to defend what's right. And so I would say to anybody who has a strong South Node in Capricorn or energy that they feel like is just really holding them back, is to ask yourself, do you really want the past to have that much control over you? You're giving your power away to the past. Your gift sits in the present and what you do with your future. That's your gift every day, every moment, every breath. That's how I would look at that energy.
Thank
I
you.
realized,
Yes.
I wanted to add too that Capricorn connects to depression. And, you know, there's a lot of people that struggle with depression or struggling with it right now with transiting Saturn and Capricorn. Depression, you know, Jeffrey used to like to refer to it as reflection, necessary reflection. So something becomes so heavy, so hard, so difficult that you just, your belly gets so full of whatever it is, it has to change. It gets pissed, actually, through the square to Aries. I'm tired of feeling this way. And so depression or reflection is necessary at times, but it's important to time limit it. Just, you know, if you're really going through it, just say, okay, for an hour today, I'm not going to be depressed. I'm going to force myself to go take the dog for a walk in the woods, or, you know, read a good book or anything. Time limit. And then, or I'm only allow myself an hour today to be depressed. I like that one better. And then I'm going to work really hard on doing things to change that. And sometimes if you're dealing with a Saturn transit, it's impossible to not feel the weight of the world. And this is the power of astrology that I love so much, because if you know that transit, Saturn's sitting on your moon or something for, you know, forever, maybe it's retrograding back and forth and you're like, I can barely get a breath, can't catch a break here, then you know that you're in it for a short period of time. It's not forever. So ask yourself, how can I make the most of these lessons so they don't come back again? And I think that's helpful. I mean, when I was in corporate America before I became an astrologer, which was like almost 20 years ago now. I can't believe it. But I remember that before I got my very first reading, I was feeling so much intensity, and I was so I'm a Sagittarius. I've got like 3 planets in Sag. I have Saturn in the 9th. I was the eternal optimist. I always found a way to feel good. And there's nothing in the world that used to work that could help me at that time. I had Pluto coming over all those planets, Saturn return, coming out of a Saturn return. And I thought there was something seriously psychologically wrong with me. I had no clue what to do with how I was feeling. And that's when I went to a therapist, and she had recommended that I call this particular astrologer. And, for a couple of reasons. But when I discovered that I was undergoing these transits, because I was not raised with astrology, I didn't come to this work until I was almost 30 years old, that there was a reason that I was feeling the way I was feeling, just to know the reason. And now astrology can't cause anything to happen. It reflects our reality, but it does speak to what we are feeling. And I wanted her to tell me that tomorrow, or even next week, would have been okay, that this transit was going to be over. I was so weary. And she told me I had another 1.5 years of that transit, the Pluto one in particular. And while I felt completely devastated by what she said, because I didn't know how I was going to keep going at that time, and honestly, everything in my life appeared to be fine, which was what was creating the greatest inner just dis-ease. I was just, I couldn't understand it. Everything on paper looked fine, but I was dying inside. But for her to tell me that it was going to take a certain period of time did create something to work with. Saturn. How much time am I going to have to feel this way? And why am I going through this right now? And what can I do with this energy? How can I support this transition? This was the period in my life when I left corporate America to become an astrologer. It was never on my radar. Trust me. So anyway, I would just say that the astrology, in terms of timing, if any of you are experiencing a lot of Saturnian energy, it does help to know, even if in 6 months something really powerful is shifting, even if it's in 6 months. I was told 1.5 years. So 6 months, it doesn't feel like that much time, like a blip on the radar screen, really. It's knowing that something is coming in your future that creates relief in the moment, because you know it's coming. It's when when there's a fear of the unknown and we don't know how long we're going to feel this way. That's when people give up, frankly. There is hope in symbols, because we know they never lie. And I love also what Nelson Mandela says. I thank the gods for my unconquerable soul. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. You are the captain of your soul. You are the master of your fate, linked with the choices you are making every moment of every day. Any other questions?
Yes, we do. Meredith and Laura, are you able to unmute and ask your questions? Okay, well, Laura's question is, in brief, can you please describe what a reversed nodal transit asks of the individual?
Future meets the past. That's very brief, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, if you think about what happened to JFK, You know, that was definitely a relive for him from another life. And so I would say that something from your past is unfinished. And that must mean, I'm just assuming this, what's her name? What did you say her name was?
Laura.
I'm assuming Laura has a south node in Capricorn and a north node in Cancer. If not, I'll just speak to this. So if the transiting north node is coming across her natal south node, it means that she has a choice now to make new choices in the face of old dynamics, new chapters, a new transition in time, something new to commit to. The transiting north node, transiting north node, did I say that right? On her south node in Cancer? Yes. Is about her maturing as a woman in the world, empowering herself as a woman, allowing herself to experience vulnerability, to trust herself in that uncertainty, and to find that strength within herself, to establish more strength in her stance and in her walk and in the world. It is a period of maturation, for sure. And I would just say to her too, to really pay attention to the rulers of where Saturn and the moon is natally in her chart, and where if they are receiving any other kind of transit as well. They're going to show her how it happens.
Thanks, Kristin.
Sure.
A question from Meredith. Kristin, can you say how the transiting north and south nodes of Pluto and Saturn affect transits versus the planets themselves?
Can you reread that again?
Yeah. Can you say how the transiting north and south nodes of Pluto and Saturn affect the transits via the planets themselves?
Well, I'll see if I'm clear on this question. One of the examples I gave was transiting Pluto conjunct its own south node. Transiting Saturn will be conjunct its own south node as well. And I would just say this is something reaching maximum density. It's the Capricorn patriarchal signature coming full circle. Like I said, even 84 years ago, there was a time of the Great Depression and Hitler. It's carries the same kind of devastating quality in places. But there is also the polarity being the north nodes of Pluto and Saturn and Jupiter are in Cancer. So this also reflects who is responding to this repeat in history, whether it's women or minorities, etc. So if she's talking about those nodes contacting a personal planet in someone's chart, I'd have to see the whole chart to be able to speak directly to what that means. But a transiting south node of Pluto or south node of Saturn is going to recreate karmic dynamics or energize fears from your past that you may have to relive in order to rework. I'll give you an example. If somebody was betrayed in another life and they in this life meet somebody who betrayed them in another life, and they don't recognize them because the veil goes up, but there's an attraction. We will recreate patterns or attract people in our life that may have betrayed us under that transit. And it would be up to that soul to recognize or to trust themselves with the feeling that they're having around whether they should trust them or not. There would be a potential for that person to become betrayed again. So if you're aware of these transits, if this was me, I'd be saying, wow, I'm probably going to be pulling in people that have betrayed me before. I'm going to have to pay attention to who I allow into my life deeply. This is what these energies offer us. And I could speak more directly to that if I actually saw the chart, but
That's great, Kristin. Thanks. Just a few more, if that's okay with you.
sure.
Okay, great. Tashi, go ahead.
Hi, Kristin. Thank you so much for joining us on EA. I just love how you see everything.
Thanks,
So my
Tashi. Hi.
question, as I was looking at these nodes, I kind of got excited because I thought, wow, on the one hand, now Saturn is going to be a final dispositor always for the North Node, but Jupiter in a few days goes into Sagittarius, so it's a final dispositor, and Neptune has been a final dispositor. And I thought, wow, this is really going to change the terrain. How do you see it?
Well, I definitely agree. You said Saturn was a depositor for the North Node. You mean the South Node?
No.
Cancer.
Oh yeah, Saturn will disposit isn't the North Node going to be in Capricorn?
No, Cancer.
Oh, okay. Oh yeah, of course it is. I know. Sorry.
You're the woman, we're like
I'm a
moving
little
toward
busy today.
matriarchy here. Yeah, right. So this is definitely about the past repeating itself, as we're seeing all over the world, and an opportunity to change that. Jupiter in Sagittarius the timing is perfect because it does carry this quality of more international quality, an opportunity to grow beyond where we've been, for truth to prevail versus delusion or illusion. And so while I can't predict what's going to happen in 3 days because Uranus is involved and nobody can, and that's just one example of countless, I do know it's just a matter of time before the scales will tip and turn and transition. I can absolutely, what's going to happen is the younger generation, the minorities in this country, whether Hispanic, African American, women, predominantly Democratic, at least in the U.S., that culture of people, they're going to change the times. That's what's going to happen. Whether it takes Pluto and Aquarius for that to happen, it's just a matter of time. But there is a wave building. Definitely a blue wave building. There's something I wanted to mention. Well, I mean, one example of it is I gave earlier, just this Black woman in Georgia who is, nobody thought that, a Black woman could actually show up in a culture like that and be neck and neck with a white man. The title of this article I was reading said, Black Georgia voters have a message for white folks who still think we should be picking cotton, and they're coming after the GOP. And so, things are changing, and that's just here. And I realize this is occurring all over the world. So I do feel like the Jupiter and Sagittarius transit is going to help tremendously. Also, we've got a new moon in Scorpio the day after. That's Wednesday, which is, telling. At the same time, we've got some real extreme transits, right? Uranus opposing Venus, squaring the nodal axis. So it can't reflect the same old game. It just can't. So I don't know if that's what you were asking, but was there more to your question?
A little bit more, but I just wonder what you think about 3 final dispositors as opposed to we've only really had Saturn in Capricorn and Neptune in Pisces. Now we have another one.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's where they're at their strength, right? So the thing about Neptune and Pisces is that you want to, it can be in its power, it's healing, it's miracles, it's God stepping in. It's the 51 wins over the 49, right? And but the flip side of Neptune are the people who choose to believe in the delusions. And I read another article that said evangelicals say Jesus will forgive them one day. They choose to believe in a delusion and just say, well, if we're wrong, then Jesus will forgive us. That's a total delusion. It's not at all what Jesus taught. It's our action has a reaction. We can't escape payment. And so while I want to believe in the best of Neptune, there are a lot of people in this country and in this world, clearly, because they're voting people into power that are nationalistic and fascist all over the world. They're voting for people that don't have their best interest in mind at all. They're falling for lies, and that's illusion. And so while I'd like to believe that all these three depositors, Saturn's the ruler for Capricorn, Jupiter's the ruler for Sag, Neptune's the ruler for Pisces, that together the three of them will prevail. I definitely feel like they have the edge, but we are living in a very unpredictable time. And so Jupiter will be in Sag for a year. Neptune's going to be in Pisces for a long time now, and Saturn will be in Capricorn for probably another year and a half. So this next 18 months that we have now with this nodal shift is going to be dramatic. And I think that the fact that we do have Neptune in Pisces and Jupiter in Sag will help, but I don't know that it's going to fix everything. I become less like a Pollyanna and more of a realist, I think, and I'm doing my best to stay right where I need to be to continue to give all of us hope. So I know that's what we need to keep going. But Jupiter and Sag for sure, I think, is a huge piece to this puzzle.
Hopefully it'll lighten things up. Thank you so much. I agree with you.
Yeah, definitely.
I agree.
Definitely.
I see it the same way. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Tashi. I mean, Jupiter and Sag will offer some levity and definitely the hope of what is possible. And when we have that,
Hopefully it isn't Stephen Colbert getting funnier about our sad circumstances. Hopefully it's
oh my God. Well, I guess if you ever do need a comedic break from it all, that would be the first place to go.
Yeah.
He's hysterical.
Okay.
Yeah, I will say too, Jupiter and Sagittarius, I mean, humor is the best medicine. I mean, it really is something that's going to save us all in the process. Whatever it is that you are enduring personally, take some time out for some of that. I mean, it will change the nervous system faster than just about anything during this Jupiter transit. So thanks, Tashi, for that.
Thank you.
Linda, is there one more you said?
Wanda, go ahead, and then we'll have one last one after Wanda's.
Okay.
Thanks.
Hi, Kristin.
Hi, Wanda.
My question is, where does maturity and let's see. I guess what I'm getting at is the older generation. That we hear a lot about how the older generation is not being respected. There's no respect for the elders.
Mm-hmm.
But clearly, it's been clearly kind of shown that the elders are acting more like the children, and the children are acting more like the elders. So, do you see this nodal shift in a more mature, a more wise expression of the law and structure? Because it seems like to me a lot of the older generation did not question any of the laws, the morality of the laws.
That's true.
So I'm looking at this, this nodal axis is hopefully a shift in that.
Well, think about it. The older generation, a majority of them, the real older generation, were born during Pluto and Cancer. Pluto was in the sign of Cancer. And that reflects this emotional youth, right? A lack of maturity. Yes, not dealing with the emotions. They were stalling in places. They're not addressed. It was a time when, you don't talk about how you felt about things. And mothers were not teaching their boys to talk about how they felt, or they tell them, Big boys don't cry. All of that was going on during this Pluto generation. So not everybody in that generation, but a majority of them, in particular, a lot of these boys in man's bodies right now, are operating through this conditioning that they had where they weren't dealing with their emotion and maturing as a result of that. So they are acting like little boys in a man's body. And I'm sure women are acting this way as well. Of course, some of this is a Pluto and Leo generation, but it is our youth that will remind them of reality. So that, we think about, they will be, with the transiting North Node in Cancer, they will be forced to deal with the fallout of things. They will be forced to take responsibility for the things that they have set in motion, wherever it is, whether it's politically or in a relationship, whether or not will be forced to talk about their emotion, perhaps in a relationship, or they will lose their partner. So everything's on the line. Things have reached the proverbial limit. And Pluto and Scorpio generation, they aren't messing around. You think they're dancing around their emotions? Not at all, right? Pluto and Sag generation, it's truth out talking all the time. I know, I've got 2 of them. So yes, our younger generation will be teachers, and they will be teaching some lessons to the older generation.
Thanks, Kristin.
Sure.
And our final question, what advice can you please give to Leanna and others who will be experiencing their nodal return?
Hi, Leanna, and others. Nodal return, yeah. So 18 years since the nodes were in this position. And it's important to know what degree your node is, so you know exactly when it's going to happen in the next year and a half. So if you do not know that, you can email me and I will let you know. And think back 18 years ago. What was going on at that time? You are 18 years wiser, older, more seasoned. You've lived a lot of life. You are different now. But there will be similar things happening in your life, big decisions that affect the next 18 years of your life. So what I would suggest to you, or anybody with this nodal return, have the courage to really recreate a life that reflects who you are at your core, knowing that when you're not here anymore and you look back on this life, you observe yourself and feel good about the choices that you're making, that you are making the most out of your time without regret. So I just say full throttle forward, have the determination to put everything that's important to you on the line for it. Because we can't get this moment back. So just make the most out of every minute and every moment. So when you're not here anymore, you can really be proud of what you did at this juncture.
Beautiful. Thank you, Kristin. Kristin, any final words before we wind down?
Yeah, lastly, I would just like to say, if any of you who are listening, and I know that there may be people here that haven't studied astrology a great deal, and there's other people that are very advanced. If you don't know about the original teachings of evolutionary astrology, my teacher, Jeff Green, taught a course. The original course was in the 90s that is available by DVD. All of what I shared here, all of what I know came from this work, the gift of this work that he brought to this planet. So there's a place for you to access those DVDs. You don't have to become an astrologer, and a wonderful message board for you to post questions, schoolofevolutionaryastrology.com. We also had a thread on Saturn. Gosh, Linda, I don't know how many years ago was that, but if you put Saturn in the search engine, there's a handful of us that did extensive posts. It's very extensive, and Saturn through the houses, that we actually only got to the 4th house, which is interesting because Saturn in the 4th house carries that Cancer Capricorn combination. And so several astrologers were writing about these archetypes in general, and you can expand your awareness of these archetypes. I was really only able to scratch the surface here today, and it's free. You can go to the message board, just drop in it in the search engine, and there's so much information there that you can access in your studies. So I just like to let people know about that. And thank you, Linda, for just the time and space to be here with you all. It was an honor, and we're all in this together, you know. So I wish you all a beautiful transition into Cancer and Capricorn, and may you have the courage to move forward in the ways that you know that you need for your own evolution.
Great. Thank you so much, Kristin. A wonderful presentation. Looking forward to more in the future. Would you all please thank Kristin Fontana, everyone?
Thank you, Kristin.
Thank you, Kristin.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Kristin.
Christina.
Thank you.
Bye.
Namaste.
Bye, thank you.
Namaste.
Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thanks, Kristin.
Thank you.